There's a moment almost everyone has experienced, but very few people ever stop to think about. You open the back door early in the morning. The birds are singing loudly, branches moving softly in the wind, tiny calls echoing between rooftops. The world feels alive. Then you step outside, and suddenly, silence. Not gradual silence. Instant silence. As if something invisible just entered the environment. The birds stop mid-song. The trees feel different. Even the air changes. And for one strange second, you feel like you interrupted something you weren't supposed to hear. Most people ignore this moment. But once you truly notice it, you can't stop noticing it. Because the silence feels intentional. Like the birds know something. And maybe the strangest part is this. Scientifically, they do. Birdsong is not random background noise. To birds, sound is survival. Every chirp carries information. Warnings, territory claims, mating calls, location signals, tiny constant updates about safety. So when birds suddenly go quiet, researchers say it usually means one thing. Something changed. A threat entered the area. And without realizing it, sometimes that threat is you. Not because birds hate humans, but because humans are loud in ways we don't even notice anymore. Heavy footsteps, door vibrations, eye contact, movement patterns. To a tiny animal surviving every second on instinct, your arrival changes the entire emotional atmosphere of the environment instantly. And suddenly the silence becomes less mysterious and somehow more unsettling. Because for the first time, you realize the natural world has been reacting to your presence this entire time, even when you thought nobody noticed you. But what researchers discovered next was even stranger. Because birds don't just react to movement, they react to emotion. And this is where the story changes completely. Deep in forests across the world, scientists began recording bird behavior before storms, earthquakes, and predator attacks. At first, they were studying migration patterns. But hidden inside the data was something unexpected. Birds often became quiet before visible danger appeared. Sometimes minutes before, sometimes longer. Researchers realized birds are extraordinarily sensitive to environmental shifts humans barely perceive at all. Tiny pressure changes in the atmosphere, subtle vibrations in the ground, distant sounds too low for human hearing. To birds, the world is alive with signals we are almost completely blind to, which raises an uncomfortable possibility. How much is happening around you right now that you simply cannot detect? Imagine standing alone outside at dusk. Everything's suddenly quiet. No birds, no movement, just wind moving through empty trees. Your body reacts before your mind does. Your shoulders tighten. Your breathing changes. Because humans instinctively fear sudden silence. And there's a reason for that. In nature, silence often means danger nearby. For thousands of years, human survival depended on noticing environmental shifts exactly like this. When forests suddenly became quiet, our ancestors understood something important immediately. A predator was close. Even today, the nervous system still remembers that ancient warning. That's why silence in nature feels emotionally heavy in a way city silence never does. It feels older, primal, as if the world itself is holding its breath. But then researchers uncovered something even stranger. Birds don't only react to physical threats. They react to emotional energy too. Not spiritually, biologically. Humans constantly leak emotional information through posture, movement speed, breathing patterns, facial tension, and eye focus. Animals read these signals instinctively because survival depends on reading intention quickly. And birds are exceptionally observant. A calm human moves differently from an anxious one. A grieving person walks differently from a joyful one. Even without words, animals detect emotional states through behavior patterns humans don't realize they're broadcasting, which may explain why certain bird encounters feel deeply personal during emotionally intense periods of life. You walk outside after an argument. Silence. You step outside after receiving terrible news. Silence. And your emotional brain immediately starts connecting meaning to the moment, as if the birds sensed something inside you before you even understood it yourself. Psychologists call this emotional projection. But emotional projection becomes powerful when nature appears to respond repeatedly, especially during loneliness, especially during grief, especially during moments when humans desperately want the universe to acknowledge what they're feeling. And maybe that's why silence from birds can feel strangely painful sometimes. Not because the birds are rejecting you, but because the silence forces you to finally hear yourself. And this is where the mystery becomes deeply personal. Because many people eventually notice something even stranger than silence. The birds don't stay quiet forever. Sometimes, they slowly begin singing again around you. There's a moment that changes the relationship between humans and wild animals forever. It's small, almost invisible, but emotionally unforgettable. The first time an animal decides you are safe. A bird lands nearby, without panic. A crow watches you calmly from a fence. A sparrow keeps singing even after you step outside. And something inside you softens instantly. Because trust from a wild creature feels different from human trust. It cannot be manipulated. It cannot be faked. Animals do not care about status, appearance, money, or words. They care about safety, presence, energy, consistency, which makes their trust feel strangely pure. Researchers studying urban birds discovered something fascinating over the last decade. Many birds are adapting specifically to individual human behavior. Some birds recognize safe humans and dangerous humans separately. Others alter flight distance depending on past experiences with specific people. In other words, birds remember, not just faces, patterns, routines, intentions. And once you realize that, ordinary mornings begin feeling completely different. The robin outside your house may not simply live there. It may know you live there, know your schedule, know your movements, know whether you are calm or unpredictable. And suddenly nature no longer feels distant. It feels aware. This realization affects people emotionally more than scientists expected. Because modern life has made many humans feel invisible, ignored in crowds, forgotten online, disconnected from everything real. Then one quiet morning, a bird chooses not to fly away from them. And somehow, that tiny moment feels healing. Not logically, emotionally. Because being trusted by nature awakens something ancient inside the human nervous system. A feeling our ancestors experienced constantly before cities separated us from the natural world. For most of human history, survival depended on understanding animal behavior deeply. Humans once noticed every warning call, every sudden silence, every shift in bird movement instinctively. We belonged to the same environment. But modern humans lost that connection. Now we move through nature like strangers. And perhaps that's why bird silence feels so mysterious today. It reminds us we are no longer fully listening to the world around us. But the most unbelievable part comes later. Because scientists eventually discovered birds communicating warnings to each other about specific humans. And once you hear how they do it, you may never hear birdsong the same way again. In certain experiments, researchers recorded birds producing entirely different alarm calls depending on the type of danger approaching. One call for cats, another for snakes, another for birds of prey. Different sounds, different urgency, different meanings. To humans, birdsong often sounds random. Beautiful, maybe, but random. To birds, it's an information network. A living surveillance system spread across forests, neighborhoods, and skies. One bird notices movement. Another repeats the warning. Then another. And suddenly, an entire environment changes emotionally within seconds. Including silence. Especially silence. Because silence itself can become communication. Think about that carefully. When birds suddenly stop singing around you, it may not simply mean quiet. It may mean information is moving through the environment faster than you can perceive it. A hidden conversation happening above your head. And perhaps that's why certain silences feel so intense. Your nervous system senses communication even when your conscious mind cannot decode it. Researchers studying chickadees found that even tiny variations in calls could contain different levels of threat information. Some birds literally alter sound complexity based on how dangerous a predator appears. That means somewhere in the trees above you, birds may constantly be evaluating risk, intention, movement, and survival probabilities every second. An entire invisible language hidden inside ordinary sound. But here's where things become emotionally strange. Humans also communicate through silence. Think about the quiet after an argument. The silence inside hospitals at night. The silence during funerals. The silence after someone leaves your life forever. Certain silences contain emotional weight words cannot hold. And maybe that's why birds' silence affects people so deeply. It mirrors human silence, the kind filled with tension, uncertainty, memory, or grief. Not empty silence, meaningful silence. And once your brain emotionally connects those ideas together, every quiet morning begins feeling symbolic somehow, as if nature itself briefly paused to acknowledge your presence. Of course, scientifically, there are practical explanations for almost everything. Birds quiet down to assess danger, to listen carefully, to conserve attention, to avoid revealing their location. But humans are emotional creatures. We naturally turn behavior into story, especially when the story feels connected to our own loneliness. And loneliness changes perception in powerful ways. Researchers found lonely individuals often become more emotionally sensitive to animals, nature, and environmental details. The human brain searches for connection anywhere it can find it, which may explain why certain people become deeply attached to recurring bird encounters. Not because the bird is magical, but because the interaction interrupts emotional isolation. For one brief moment, something living noticed them. And in today's world, that feeling is becoming increasingly rare. But there's still one final layer to this mystery. Because sometimes the silence has nothing to do with danger at all. Sometimes, the birds are listening too. Late at night, when cities become quiet enough, you begin noticing things modern life usually hides. Wind against leaves, distant wings overhead, tiny movements in darkness. The natural world never actually stopped communicating. Humans simply stopped hearing it. And perhaps that's the deepest truth hidden inside all of this. Bird silence feels mysterious because it reminds us the world around us is not passive. It reacts, constantly, to weather, to danger, to movement, to emotion, to presence. For centuries, humans believed nature existed separately from us, like scenery in the background of our lives. But birds reveal something unsettlingly different. We are participants inside the environment, not observers outside it. The moment you step outdoors, the world changes slightly. Animals notice. Wind patterns shift around movement. Soundscapes alter. Tiny lives respond instantly to your existence. And maybe that realization explains why sudden silence feels so emotionally powerful. For one brief moment, you become aware that you are being perceived too. Not by people, by life itself. A deer freezing in distant grass. A crow watching from a rooftop. A blackbird stopping its song mid-note. The environment noticing your arrival. And perhaps modern humans are emotionally starving for exactly that feeling. To feel seen by something real again. Not algorithms. Not screens. Not notifications. Something alive. Something ancient. Something honest. Which is why moments of silence in nature can suddenly feel almost spiritual. Not because birds possess supernatural powers, but because silence creates awareness. And awareness changes perception. You notice your breathing, your thoughts, your loneliness, your memories. The silence outside becomes silence inside. And sometimes that can feel terrifying. But sometimes, it feels comforting. Like the world briefly paused with you. Maybe that's why so many people remember these moments for years afterward. The morning birds stopped singing after heartbreak. The strange silence outside the hospital. The quiet backyard after losing someone they loved. Not because the birds understood human pain literally, but because human beings naturally attach emotional meaning to moments when nature seems synchronized with their inner world. And honestly, maybe that instinct exists for a reason. Because humans were never meant to feel separate from nature in the first place. For most of history, we woke with birdsong, slept beside wilderness, read emotion through weather and animal behavior instinctively. But modern life buried that connection beneath noise. Until one morning, you step outside, and suddenly the birds go silent. And for one strange second, the entire world feels aware of you. Not in a frightening way, in a deeply human way. A reminder that your presence changes the environment around you, even when you think it doesn't. A reminder that silence itself can carry meaning. And maybe the most beautiful part of this mystery is that the birds eventually sing again. Not because the world stopped noticing you, but because it decided you belonged there after all. Have you ever experienced a moment when nature suddenly went silent around you, and it felt impossible to forget?